Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy. I'm Tina Johnson, your host. Join me as we talk to the people on the front lines, the change makers and activists who are building a stronger, healthier democracy for all of us. Whether you're looking for expert advice, a new perspective, or just a little inspiration, this is where you'll find it. Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy. I'm coming to you from Cameroon, where I'll be spending the next few weeks facilitating dialogues centered on the pillars of our show: peace and democratic progress. While I'm on the ground here, I wanted to take a purposeful pause in our season to revisit a conversation that feels more urgent with every passing day. In season 2, I was in conversation with Zolal Habibi to discuss the grueling, courageous struggle for a free Iran. As we look at the global state of democracy today, this conversation is more than just timely, it is essential. I'm also deeply mindful of how often the prevailing narrative excludes the work of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, an organization that has spent years leading the charge for a democratic future in the region. If this is your first time hearing this episode, or you're just returning to it with fresh ears, the lessons within it are vital for anyone who cares about the global fight for self-determination. So I hope you enjoy this special re-release with human rights activists and the leading voice for democracy and women's rights in Iran, and also a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Zolal Habibi. Let's get into it.
I just spoke about the 1999 student uprisings, but then we had the 2009 uprisings that people used the whole sham elections as as an excuse to be able to come to the streets, because we know that there are no free elections in Iran under the mullahs. All the so-called candidates, they have to prove their loyalty to Khamenei first. And it's always been those who have actually, unfortunately, served the regime the most, be it from Ahmadinejad, who was known as the man of 1,000 bullets because he personally had executed 1,000 people in Evin prison in 1980s, to Raisi, who was the butcher of 1988. That's what he was known for his role. And then he was part of the death committees for the 1988 massacre. And that's why he had a 6th grade level education, but that's the reason they brought him into power, because he had proven his loyalty with those killings. So everyone that has served in this regime has blood on their hands, and that's why they are able to come to power. Just look at the past year of Pezeshkian. 1,600 people have been executed in the past year in Iran. Just last month, in the month of August, 170 people were executed, including 5 women, including 3 public executions, because the regime needs those public executions to spread fear in society. So that is where we stand today. But this has never died down. I mean, just if you look from 2017 till now, there have been 3 major uprisings in Iran. And and it still lives on. You mentioned that the 2022 uprisings, actually in about 10 days or so is the anniversary of that. And we see since then the continuation in different forms of resistance, of protest, of people really taking it on themselves to be that force which creates change. I think the people of Iran have come to realize, especially the younger generation. I think the Gen Z of Iran is a very interesting generation. They have realized from everything that their parents have also, were raised with. They're a special generation because not only themselves, but their parents have also seen nothing but this regime. So they know that if we keep on staying silent just to safeguard our own lives, this is going to continue. I mean, what our parents have, you can't really call it a life. They're just alive. And right now, with the current circumstances in Iran, it's
Repeat it.
Mhm.
Okay. Yep.
Stressful.
What your parents
Yeah,
had?
yeah, yeah. This generation, the Gen Z, they what they're saying to themselves is like, what our parents have is not really a life. They're just alive, but this is not living. I mean, this situation that they have. And especially with the current circumstances, I mean, there is unfortunately the I mean, the economical situation of people in Iran is devastating. Unfortunately, over 60% of our people are living under the line of poverty and in complete poverty, like hunger. Um, the line of poverty is, I think, at 80% right now. And on the other hand, right now on daily basis, they don't have water and electricity. So this is really turning into a major issue in Iran. Daily, they officially, like statewide, they don't have electricity for 3 or 4 hours a day. And then they don't have water, running water. And just imagine right now, in a time of the age of technology, people can't even run their businesses right now because all of a sudden, like the electricity is cut off. What are you going to do? How are you going to be able to even provide for your family? So it's like basic needs that are not covered right now. So it's not just the issue of the suppression, the executions, the fact that the regime has entered every aspect of people's personal lives. Um, when you want to apply for a college or university in Iran, aside from all the testing and everything, you have to pass a ideological test. And now, since this year, one of the criterion is that they check your Instagram account and your social media accounts to make sure that you have, you know, your positions do not oppose that of the regime. So really what you see on social media from Iran, it's people can't really voice their actual thoughts because it's all controlled. Um, this is despite the fact that everything is censored in Iran and you don't have access to it. Everyone uses VPNs to be able to connect to the outer world. But, these are the limitations that are set. From day one, Khomeini had this idea that we need to be able to get members of families to be informants in regards to one another. And so that distrust that the Khomeini has created over these decades in the people's, and in society. And that's why we think that in my opinion, one of the greatest crimes perpetrated by this regime, aside from all the killings and the warmongering and everything, it's betraying people's trust. Because to rebuild that trust, that's not easy, and that's going to take a very long time. Um, and but that's the current situation of people inside of Iran.
There are two slogans, one from 2009 and the other from 2022. The first was, where is my vote? Which, brought out mostly the urban and educated professional people in, I want to say, what's the capital of Iran?
Iran.
Tehran. I was going to say Tel Aviv, which is wrong on all levels. Tehran. And then you have the women life freedom movement, and that mantra is life. Is it woman, life, freedom? And I think that in what you were just sharing about the historical context and the reality that people are living under within the Iranian theocracy regime, right? It's the Islamic State, is that the idea and the desire for freedom for people really culminates around the injustices they feel. So in 2009, the Green Movement, it was really about the fact that people felt, it was proven that the election was stolen. and people were angry and were willing to put their bodies on the line to engage in, maybe not changing everything, but saying, hey, if we're going to go through this process, let's make it real. And then you have, I think it's Masa
Masa Amini.
Amini's. Is it Masa? Masa Amini?
Masa Amini. Yeah.
Mm, and her murder for wearing her hijab improperly, and then that culminating in sort of that pressure point in the country around the injustices, and again, people willing and continuing to be willing to put their bodies on the line for freedom and for what they believe allows them to have a democratic voice. And I think something for me that is really interesting is how willing the Iranian Islamic State is, how willing it is to kill its own people to maintain control. And I wanted to ask this question of you because I believe you've probably put a lot of thought into this because of you're part of the resistance. But why does the regime fear its own people so deeply and their desire to have this free, secular, independent Iran? Where is that fear coming from? What is that rooted in?
Yeah. Um, Two things. I'll respond to both your question and just a few things about what you said about the previous uprisings in Iran. Like for instance, as I said, people are looking for the excuse to be able to come to the streets, to be able to create complete change. So the goal has always been regime change for the Iranian people. It's never been reform or anything like that because uh, we believe that a dove never gives, a viper never gives birth to a dove, right? Um, like Mousavi, who was the candidate against Ahmadinejad in 2009, first of all, they were both from within the system. Mousavi was the prime minister during the 1988 massacres. So it wasn't like that he was, someone with a clean slate. No, it was just if you find a rift between the regime, you need to be able to concentrate on that and use that. And that's what people did. Or, like, for instance, you pointed out 2022 with the death of Masa Amini. It's not the first time that something like this has happened, but to use that possibility. Or just about 2 years before that, it was the hike in the price of fuel overnight. People came to the streets. That was actually, if you want to look at it, that was like the largest or greatest uprising in Iran in recent years. The only thing was that it was very short because the regime cut off internet, and then within 3 days they had 1,500 people killed to be able to stop those protests. With 2022, when it came around, the regime knew they can't do that anymore, and that's why it took a lot of time for them to be able to curb and control the protest. And they had to use different means because they were under a lot of pressure in regards to the 1,500 people who had been killed in the previous uprising. So, they had to change their methods. So the people of Iran also had to change their methods. So this is a continuous fight. And right now, what's interesting is how the slogan "Women, Life, Freedom" has evolved, and now people in Iran are saying "Woman, Resistance, Freedom," because if we want to reach that freedom, it's through resistance and not being passive. So this is how it has evolved in the past 2-3 years. In regards to why this regime turns to suppression, I think that is every dictatorship in history, because it's not a legitimate regime. They need to keep their power somehow, and that's through suppression, and that's through otherwise it wouldn't be a dictator, right? because they want to be able to keep their hold on power. Khomeini had a famous sentence. He said that during the Iran-Iraq war, that we will continue this war till the last house is standing in Tehran. The reason was he knew that war meant his lifeline. So he was willing to, put everyone under, you know, um, kill everyone, but to be able to live off the pile of bodies that were coming together. The regime used 450,000 children to open the minefields. So a regime that is willing to kill its future like that, they're not going to show mercy to anyone. And that's what makes the regime such a danger and threat for the world. A regime that doesn't show mercy to its own people, they're not going to show mercy to anyone else. That's why Iran is the number one state sponsor of terrorism. But the other part is, this is how the regime has been able to really manage to stay in power. Why are governments hesitant to have a firm policy toward Iran? We're not speaking about, war or troops on the ground, just a firm policy on Iran. Why not? Why do they turn a blind eye? I mean, 170 people were executed in the month of August. Where is the international outcry on that? Iran is the number one country in executions per capita. Does anyone care about that? Unfortunately, no, not.
Well, let's can
And
we
yeah,
let's unpack that part a bit though, because I think that's a really important point. That when I think understanding that on a daily basis, the people of Iran are under attack. I mean, they are being murdered, as you pointed out, with the number of executions that you started with at the very beginning of this podcast. And now to know that in the month of August, was it 1,600 people have been
no,
murdered?
and the in the past year, since from August last year to August of this year, it's 1,600 people who were executed. This is aside from people who are killed under torture or they're
Mhm.
killed on the streets. These are people who are actual execution sentences. In the
But I
month of
was
August, it was 170.
170. But so the question, so why is it that there is no external intervention, not just from the West, but I mean, even from other Islamic nations that may not have the same kind of um, government setup, system of governance?
So this is exactly where I was trying to go to. Like Iran, as I said, is the number one state sponsor of terrorism. Their terrorism has extended from Argentina to the region, anywhere in the region. Every neighboring country of Iran is afraid of Iran. And its proxies, its, warmongering. It's not just Iraq that has been a victim of it. It's been Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Palestine, all of them. So Iran's intervention or warmongering has always been an issue for the region. They know that if they take a stance, they will have to pay a price for that. And they have over the last few decades, each country separately and differently, but they all have. Um, for the Western governments, it's also the same thing. I mean, they have interests in the region which are targeted by the regime, and the regime makes that clear that we will target them. We saw the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, who the assassination attempt on him. What was it based on? It's a fatwa by Khomeini from back in 1989, and it still stands. We see that last year in Spain, the Iranian regime has given a list of about 150, I want to say, prominent foreign personalities, lawmakers, who are on the hit list of the regime. Alejo Vidal Quadros, Dr. Alejo Vidal Quadros was one of the top in that list. And there was attempted assassination on him in Spain, carried out by um, members of like a mafia, and whatnot, but at the behest of the Iranian regime. They were paid off by the Iranian regime. So, and then we also have the hostage diplomacy. Just let's look at the countries in Europe, for instance. Also the US. The US had, in exchange for hostages, they released $6 billion of Iranian assets back, and with pallets of cash, right? In France is constantly a victim of hostage taking by the regime, and not just now, from 1980s till now. And unfortunately, what the regime uses as the bargaining chip is the Iranian resistance, because the headquarters of the Iranian resistance is in France, the National Council of Resistance of Iran. When you look at Germany, same thing. They have hostages. Sweden, Belgium, um, every country, and we've seen the exchange, the swaps, the pressures on the Iranians. The regime had dissidents assassinated in Rome, in Vienna, in Berlin, in Netherlands, in Turkey, in the US. Practically everywhere. So this is a regime that has made clear to all that I will, go to all means to keep my power. And if you defy me, you will have to pay a price for that.
You serve on the national, I want to make sure I get it right, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran.
Yes.
And what you just said about how Iran maintains its stranglehold on external actors intervening, how has the role that you were in shaped your perspective on what Iran's future could look like if this is how it is behaving? Like, what would need to change in order for external pressure to be effective or negotiations to happen and opening up the
I think
opportunity
that
for the work of the
from our perspective,
Go ahead.
okay. I think that from our perspective, what is key is to understand what is that final goal. Unfortunately, we're not dealing with a democratic government. So negotiations or diplomacy, unfortunately, is ineffective. We wish that it was effective. We wish that this regime was a regime that could be reformed. But unfortunately, it's passed that test time and time again that it's not possible. So what's important is to understand that and listen to the solution that is being presented by the Iranian people. Time has shown that negotiations are not effective, so appeasement policy is also not effective. It has also shown, because of the nature of Iran, because of Iran's geopolitical role, because of how large Iran is and how the system works there, foreign intervention is also not effective. And we've also had that experience, in the region. Just look at Iraq and Afghanistan and, Libya. We don't want foreign intervention. And we also have that experience from the coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh. That's not something the Iranian people want. So the solution is not a so-called diplomacy that's going to be imposed on the people of Iran. It's bombing is not going to bring democracy, and doesn't. But we have a solution. The thing is that what it sets Iran apart from all the other countries that we mentioned is the fact that there is a organized resistance movement. The Iranian people have paid a grave price for bringing democracy to Iran. And it's a group that is, what they stand for is not just in writing. They they've passed the test of time. For over 44 years now, the National Council of Resistance of Iran has been at the forefront of the fight with the Iranian regime. It has proven that it stands by its principles, and it has shown it in practice. Like, for instance, when they say equality between men and women in the future of Iran, well, you see that in the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the president-elect is a woman. 52% of the parliament in exile are women, and the movement has been led by women for 33 years now. So that in itself speaks for itself, right? I also think that it's important to, note the fact that this movement, this resistance, it has people on the ground. It has the capability of organizing at an international level. So these are all, tests and signs that, they have the capability to bring about change. The fact that we have, in the past year, we had 39,000 activities carried out by resistance units inside of Iran. This is despite the fact that they are being arrested by the hundreds. This is despite the fact that right now, 14 people are on death row for affiliation with the resistance units. This is despite the fact that, very prominent figures in the political prisoners in Iran, they are charged with being, members of the resistance units. But despite that, you see it increasing. Their activities increasing, their numbers increasing, and they're keeping the flame of resistance alive. So when you put all of those different aspects together, and the fact that this resistance movement actually has dedicated members, people like myself that have dedicated decades of their lives, but there are people who've dedicated like 50 years of their lives, 40 years of their lives to this movement. That kind of dedication, that's something that you don't see. And you know that it can't be for power, because there are easier ways to gain power than to dedicate, 4 decades of their life to a cause. And I think that's something that can be trusted. So the message of the Iranian resistance, Mrs. Rajabi has stated this many, many times. Since 20 years ago in the European Parliament, she stated that the solution to Iran, it's not war or appeasement, it's supporting the Iranian resistance to create that stable change and bring democracy to Iran with the Iranian people. And also what comes after, because that's like the main question that comes after it, is, the people of Iran, they have a very rich culture. Iran was the country that had the first human rights declaration comes from Iran. The people of Iran have shown that they are, they yearn to have a democratic republic in Iran, a secular democratic republic, drawing the line on all forms of dictatorship and tyranny, be it turbaned or crowned, doesn't make a difference. It's time for the people to rule over the people, and for the government to be, we need a sovereign state. We need, and so I think one of the things that's really important to us is, first of all, separation of religion and state. Second, the ballot box needs to be the final criterion, and the people need to be able to have control over that. The third is to be able to really, just one sec, sorry. What was it? The third issue is, for the people of Iran, the time has come to be able to have a democracy that they can really rely on, and not to have foreign interests rule over how things go in Iran. And that has been a very key point for us. Like, for instance, one of the things that we take a lot of pride in is the fact that the National Council of Resistance and the People's Majority Organization of Iran, which is the main part of, main group in the NCRI, have been able to keep their independence, be it politically, financially. They're not linked to any governments. They rely for resources on the Iranian people and just philanthropists who are willing to help a movement, really. So that is what has been able to allow us to keep our integrity and to be able to stand by our principles and not budge, And I think that's really key because the Iranian people, we have a saying in Farsi, we say, someone who's been bit by a snake is afraid of a rope that's black and white. And that is the case with the Iranian people. I mean, we have that experience. And so it's very important to be able to prove and show to the Iranian people, that we know that our strength is in keeping independence and not being linked to any governments. Even though, it would be a lot easier probably if we were financially supported by someone. But that independence is what has been key in continuing our fight for 60 years.
If Iran were to wake up tomorrow as a democracy, what do you think would be the first changes that ordinary people would feel in their daily lives?
Well, the first thing is that all of these suppressive organs, which the Iranian regime has 34 suppressive organs, they would be all dismantled. So there would be no more revolutionary guards, no more Basiji forces, no more, MOIS and whatnot. All political prisoners would be freed. That's very key in Iran. People would have the right to choose their own attire. People have the right to, hold or display their beliefs, their religious beliefs, lack of it, or believing in whatever religion that they do. Ethnic minorities, they are, unfortunately, they face systematic suppression. They would have the ability to have, autonomy. I think independent judiciary, which is key. People having the right to choose in every aspect of their lives, the right to choose what they want to. It's not just what they want to wear, what they want to eat, where they want to study, everything. And equality, I think. Equality between men and women. I think that is something that will be seen immediately. And removal of censorship in all its forms. I think those are some of the key points that you'll be able to see the difference within a day in Iranian society. And we look forward to that.
The resistance has a 10-point plan for Iran's democratic future. And I'm curious because democracy has many forms. I'm curious what kind of democracy would best fit Iran. Is it about adopting Western-style institutions or building something rooted in Iran's own rich history and culture?
I think that is a decision that so based on the plans of the NCRI, after the overthrow of the regime, there is a transitional government, and an election is held after 6 months for assembly, which that assembly will be writing the constitution. I think that it will probably be a mix of both, actual, because I think this is like a type of knowledge and science. There are certain things that work, and there are certain things that don't. But I think that it will probably be a mixture of that. I mean, I think those core issues is, just having the checks and balances of, between the separate bodies of the government, to make sure that it is responding to the people, at the end of the day that is held accountable. Accountability, I think, is very key in ending impunity, because impunity is what leads to dictatorships. Um, so I think that um, the independent judiciary is key. An independent, system of parliament is key, and also just having those three branches in place and properly working. Um, I think that the type of government at the end of the day is going to be decided by the people and the constitution that they will vote on. But I think that there are a lot of governments or countries that we can learn from. Like for instance, Switzerland, for instance, everything is put to election there. Everyone gets a vote on everything. I think that's a beautiful system. Or the the education system in Norway, for instance, or different things. And I think that um, we as a I mean, this is something that needs to be worked on, so that assembly is going to be doing that to come up with what is the best roadmap ahead. But we do hope to see. I think what's important is that it'll be a secular democratic republic. Those are like the three key principles, I think, that we need to make sure that we see. Under that, a lot of these things fall into place.
It's interesting because there's the external work that's being done by the resistance abroad that's connected to the resistance that's internal within Iran. And there's this 10-point plan and all the things that you just laid out around what a transition would look like. And it just made me think about how do you all how is it possible that when democracy comes, that the transition from an Islamic theocracy, an exam an exl sorry, an exl Islamic
Islamic
State
theocracy.
yeah, Islamic State theocracy transitions to a democracy? How do you get people prepared to move forward after 60 years of being oppressed under this regime? Like, is that part how is that what does that work look like? Because
I think that
and
yeah,
I'm asking that
I think
question because because
yeah,
it is
it's
a it
important.
yeah, it's a physical,
It's those,
psychological,
it's
emotional shift. Mm.
these are those very important and critical steps, that lead they decide the path forward. So as you said, it's very important. I think it's important to note a few things. One is the fact that even according to the regime itself, 95% of the people of Iran oppose the regime. So these people, one thing that is clear is that no one's going to be missing the Islamic Republic, right? Everyone is yearning for that change. Um, as I said, I think one of the most important key factors is people regaining people's trust and making sure that they know that they can trust the new system, or that this change is going to really be. We don't have any other interests along the way aside from the freedom of the Iranian people. And I think that's something that's important. They need to be able to see that on day-to-day basis. So I think those are critical. How justice prevails in Iran is key. The fact, I think, like for instance, when you look at the 10-point plan, we might say it's 10 points, but there's certain aspects or little things that might seem like just a sentence, but it's key. Like for instance, that there will be an end placed on execution. So the abolition of the execution in Iran. That is key, because otherwise it's going to be like a cycle of revenge. That's not what we want. Um, the fact that, independent judiciary system, that's key. The fact that, it's just these little things that we need to put in place to make sure that we have a smooth transition. But also, I think it's important to note that the Iranian people, Iran, the people of Iran are very educated. It's not a country that people are uneducated, for the most part, over 60% have college education. So that really does help in how things come together. Iran has the highest brain drain in the world. So we will see the return of a lot of those assets to Iran. And so I think that could put Iran on a positive, slope. And Iran is a very rich country. So, if we can fix the bases, fix the infrastructures, we can lead on the correct path. But I think what's important is that dedication. One of the things that allows me to rest at ease is the fact that I know on day one, we have thousands and thousands of people who are who have given up everything in their lives to see this day. And so they're the ones who are going to be working 24/7 to make sure that that democracy is created and that we have a sovereign state and a pluralistic state. Um, I think that really helps because it's one thing if there's like a vacuum and people are just, at each other's throat to try to gain some kind of a position in the future of Iran. It's another to know that, there are these people who, it's not just the actual members of the MEK or just even their supporters. It's people, the resistance units inside of Iran, a lot of other people who might not be active right now, but they will um, want to do this. So I think it's a project that together we can create that. But I think that the dedication that we've seen in the last 4 decades from people in the fight for freedom, it's a sign itself that we will be able to create that too. But we're not naive. We know that the hardest part starts the day after the fall of the regime to make sure that we can put together that correct path. Because it's easier to oppose something than to build something. And I think that's really key. And that's one of the key elements that Ms. Rajavi always reiterates. And even to the members of this resistance itself, that listen, everything that you're doing today is to gain that moment. But from that moment on, you need to, tighten your belts and you need to fight 1,000 times more to make sure that we can regain people's trust, really, and to rebuild Iran. I think that's very important. And as you said, I think that it's, these are just like the stepping stones that they need to be set in place to make sure that we move on the right path. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think that path also leads to this other, I'm going to call it a sort of a divergent path as well, because Iran also has a very rich ethnic and religious culture, and that becomes part of, when you're outside of your country of origin, communities are formed in ways that they aren't normally formed inside of a country, right? People gather together because of a shared sense of home. And I'm wondering how you see democracy addressing the cultural, religious, ethnic differences that do exist, even if you didn't have an Islamic state, and bringing together the communities that obviously have been brought together because of the resistance, but bringing them together in Iran to be able to accomplish a democratic process that does do what I thought was really important: bring together people to feeling a sense of equality, not being discriminated against because of their religion, or their ethnicity. I believe this is part of the 10-point plan, right? Their sexuality. Like, how is this very important part of Iran's identity addressed in democracy, do you think?
I think you touched on a very important issue, especially with the different ethnicities in Iran. One of the key points in the 10-point plan is autonomy for the different ethnicities, specifically, like, for instance, Kurdistan or whatnot. Um, and if you go back, this isn't something that the NCRA has raised today or even after 2022 and the death of Masa Amini, who was from, the Kurdish ethnicity in Iran. Um, this is something that we've had since 1983. And it's a very complete plan. And even according to a lot of Kurdish activists, they say to this day, it's the most complete plan that really guarantees the rights of minorities and having it like a autonomy within the geographical borders of a country. Um, I think that that's something that we feel strongly about, be it from, the as you said, Iran is a mix. It's a mixing bowl of all of these different ethnicities. That we have the Turks, we have the Kurds, we have the Baluch, we have the Arabs. We have a lot of different cultures, and I think it's very important to, first of all, um, guarantee their autonomy and their freedoms. Also, when it comes to, religious minorities or even, uh, everyone, I think, we have a complete plan in regards to religious freedoms in the future of Iran. That's why, even though we are, like, for instance, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, the PMI, MEK, um, despite the fact that has a, Islamic ideology or beliefs, but it's the number one group that called for a secular democracy in Iran and the National Council of Resistance. And actually, that's why the fallout with Khomeini came from there. Because from day one, the leader of the MEK said, this is 4 days after being released from prison, and a few days before Khomeini came into power, he said, you know, long live the democratic revolution of Iran. And that's where, he said, we revolted for freedom. We did not revolt for Islam, even though we're Muslims ourselves. So that's why we saw, like, for instance, back in 1979, when Khomeini wanted to force the hijab on women, what's interesting is that the first people who opposed this were a Muslim group, the MEK. So they were the first to oppose it, give a statement, and they were the ones who actually protested against it, and they actually protected the women who didn't have a hijab to make sure that they're not targeted, they're not beaten, because they said, look, this is not. First of all, this is not Islam in general. You can one of the most important verses in the Quran, it says, "There's no force in religion." So you can't, rule based on that. It's supposed to be people's choice, and it's out of, your personal aspiration to follow it or not. So I think those are really important to make sure that you have that intact, and to make sure that I think it's more than equality. If equity is important here, and that's something that we stand for. Be it when in regards to equality between men and women, be it in regards to minorities. I think that's something we need to take in consideration, especially since for 100 years, these are the parts of society that have been suppressed the most. You need to take that into uh, consideration. You can't just say, well, okay, fine, everyone was suppressed under the mullah, so let's start a clean slate. No, these people have been suppressed systematically more than everyone else. So you need to attend to that. You need to address that. You need to, provide for them. And I think that's very important in the future of Iran.
I'm thinking it also now because I think it's a good segue into unpacking what are the pathways to change towards a more towards democracy in Iran, right? So I th- um what do you believe democracy in Iran, how will it come about? How do you think democracy in Iran will come about? Does it come through gradual reform? Will it take a dramatic break from the current system to get to that place where you can actually see this equity? I love that word equity and and addressing the reality that people have been under for so long in Iran. What's those pathways to change?
Well, like a bit of background. And the first in the first year and a half after the revolution, the MEK at the time, the People's Mujahideen, PMOI, People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, they tried every possibility to create reform within the regime. Till they had this thing, they said, till the last drop of freedom, we're going to try to make this as peacefully as possible and create reform and create change, because that's what people wanted a revolution for. But Khomeini, when he opened fire on peaceful protests on June 20th, 1981, that day, thousands of people were killed. And there was a peaceful protest of 500,000 people in Tehran. It was spontaneous protest. It wasn't something that was planned from before, but 500,000 people came to the streets that day, and Khomeini ordered his hooligans to open fire on the protesters. And since that day, this fight has continued. I think that you can't really create change through reform with this regime because the fundamentals of it. I mean, the Constitution states that there's a supreme leader, and this is a so-called Islamic state, which means everything is, and he represents God on earth, right? Um, Systematically, women are suppressed, are treated as second-class citizens. I mean, and that's something that's not reformable. You have to remove completely this system. You have to remove that supreme leader from this regime. The minute that the regime, we've said for years, if the regime is willing to reform, okay, we have two things: um, end executions in Iran, or end torture in Iran, or remove the supreme leader, and then we can negotiate. But the minute the regime does that, it's going to collapse automatically. We had this experience with the Shah. The Shah, to keep his power, when Carter said to the Shah that you need to stop executions and torture, the Shah, because he needed the U.S. backing, because he was it was a dictatorship, but it was a dictatorship that was not independent, it was dependent on the U.S. at that time. So it needed to, adjust itself. And the Shah thought, okay, fine, I will do that. I will stop the executions. People knew from that moment on, it only took 18 months for the Shah to fall from that moment. The reason was people knew, okay, you might be killed on the street when you go to a demonstration, but if you're arrested, they're not going to kill you. So the fear broke. Once there's no fear, this regime is not going to be standing on its feet anymore. It'll be overthrown. So the regime, the mullahs, they have that experience. They know that how the Shah fell. So that's like their red line. Till the last minute, we're not going to do that because it'll mean our demise and our fall. So, that is what brought the Shah down. this is exactly what will have the mullahs, or will bring the mullahs down. So once you try to change the nature of a regime, then it's not that regime anymore because it doesn't have that nature anymore. So if it doesn't have a supreme leader, then they can't enter every aspect of people's lives anymore to control it. So it falls apart automatically. So when we say reform, it's one thing to have like a government intact, and then you reform certain rules or regulations. But when you go on the fundamental basis, because those are what needs to be changed, then it's going to fall apart. And that's also true with the Iranian regime. So it's not through reform. Um, as I said, it's not through foreign intervention. We think that our people have the capability and capacity to bring about the change. I think the world has seen that time and time again in the past few years. I mean, especially since 2017 till now, with all the uprisings in Iran. But unfortunately, till now, what has kept the regime afloat is, unfortunately, the support it has received from Western governments. I mean, just right now, we spoke about executions in Iran. Well, these cranes that are being used for execution, who is providing those? Germany. They know it, but they still sell it because it's financial benefits. The surveillance systems that the regime has in place, uh, unfortunately, despite knowing that it means the people's lives in Iran, Sweden provides that to the regime or other countries. So unfortunately, um, we've seen also in the uprisings, like for instance, in 2009, President Obama actually extended his hand to Khamenei. And that's why one of the main slogans in the protest in Iran was, Obama, Obama, are you with us or with the mullahs? And that same thing happened in 2022 again. The world did not, people around the world stood with the Iranian people, but the governments made clear that they don't stand with the Iranian people. And that it's time to stand with the Iranian people. That is what will create change. We're not asking for anything. We're just asking you to stop backing this regime. That is the only thing that the Iranian people are asking for.
So if this were successful and countries like Germany, or Sweden or other countries in the West who are providing financial support through selling or purchasing from Iran, whatever they're buying and purchasing from Iran, how does that translate into moving the mission of the resistance and the mission of the 95% of Iranians who are against the Islamic State there towards obtaining democracy if it's isolated in a sense? If it's isolated from having avenues of financial resources to support itself, how does that help the cause? I'm just thinking about that because it seems like when
I think
you
that
put into
it's not.
place sorry, I was gonna say because when you put in sanctions, it seems like the people that are hurt the most are the people. And so I'm wondering how would this help? How would this apply enough pressure to move the ball of democracy further for you all?
I think it's not only the financial aspect; it's also like the political aspect of it too. What those green lights that they give behind closed doors or with lack of um, positioning themselves. Like for instance, I said before, uh, where are those countries condemning the atrocities being perpetrated by this regime? Why the silence? That silence is a green light to the regime that, okay, I could get away with this. Um, and we've seen that throughout the years on different issues. I
But
mean,
I have
the-
I wanted to
yeah,
clarify something with you, but I know earlier in this conversation, something that you brought up was the fact that for many Western countries, it is the fact that they are the largest sponsored terrorist country, and the threat that that your country will be attacked, your citizens will be kidnapped. Do you know? So the financial, the political, how do they get how to get around? I'm just thinking thinking out loud. How do you get around the reality of what Iran is willing to do? Because it relies, as you said so poignantly, relies on fear, not only internally on, on its people, but externally to other nations. So when you're silent, you do give a green light. I 100% agree. But then also, if you do come out and condemn, and they put, is it a fatwa on the head of someone in your own country? So where is the, what would be, or how could countries specifically be more direct and their unwillingness to support the political, financial need of Iran and still protect and uphold their systems of safety and security? I'm just wondering if you have ideas about that
Yeah,
folks
I
could
do.
think about. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that what we have seen over the years is that the regime understands foreign policy. Um, in fact, like for instance, just look in Europe right now. Um, the European Parliament and many of the parliaments, the British Parliament, many have asked for the IRGC to be blacklisted, placed on the terrorist list. Um, it has not been done. So that sends a message to the regime that, they're not willing to cross that line yet. But in fact, um, the countries that have placed the regime on the IRGC on the terrorist list, since they've done so, the threats by the regime have decreased, not increased, if you look at the facts on the ground. Um, so I think the regime understands the firmness, and a firm policy. Also, I think that um, the regime reads between the lines too. I mean, yeah, over 4,000 parliamentarians around the world have voiced their support for not only the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi, but also they have said that we need to recognize the people's right to resist against the regime. Um, well, to actually, for governments to recognize that right of the Iranian people to stand up against the IRGC, that's really important. Um, Unfortunately, no country has ever done that yet. Or like, for instance, to recognize the Iranian resistance as an alternative. Um, we, to be honest, we're not naive. We don't think that that will ever happen until the day that the regime is falling. Because the government still, they want to pursue a relationship with this regime, and the regime knows that. So they know that they're willing to turn a blind eye where needed to keep that balance. Um, I'm not saying that there's a price for it. It might have a price, but to be honest, what I've seen is that when the regime sees that firm policy, they back out. Because the regime, it's one thing, I think the mentality of a lot of governments is that they see the regime's warmongering and terrorism as its strength, but it's actually because of its weakness. And if you understand that the regime is in a weak place, that's why they're making these threats. It's not out of power that they're making these threats. That's two complete different dimensions. So it's empty threats that they're making, really. Like, for instance, we saw this during the 12-day war. The regime makes those empty threats, or like in regards to Qasem Soleimani, and everyone was worried, the revenge of the regime. There is no revenge because the regime is in a very weak position, in a weak state of, affairs. It really it creates a lot of, clutter, but it's really not in the position to actually be able to implement that. And I think that's really important to understand and realize that the regime is in a weak place. So that's why it's effective. Maybe if the regime was not in a weak position right now, it would be different. But it's in a very weak position right now. So we need to take that into consideration and understand that. I think once we have that understanding, we could look at things through a different lens. And I think that's where we will see a change in policy. And in regards to what you said about sanctions, the reality is that the Iranian people actually support the current sanctions because it's really, unfortunately, Iran's economy is in the hands of a few that are living lavish lives in the IRGC. The infrastructure, everything is in their hands. The people of Iran are living under poverty, as I said. So they're not affected directly by the sanctions, but they know that their regime is being crippled by it. So that's why they actually support sanctions on Iran. Because it's not like the sanctions aren't like food for oil type of sanctions. They're on, they're smart sanctions. So it's not really affecting the people. That's the narrative that the regime tries to feed, to say that, it's innocent people who are being targeted. So that's why they try to lobby for that, or that messaging.
Yeah, so it sounds like international solidarity, when done in a way that actually directly benefits not just sort of the political moment, but benefits the political resistance that you all are putting up against Iran, that it actually has a role to play in supporting the work that you're all doing, uh, instead of simply kind of the countries that are unwilling to do that in a meaningful way are trying to avoid the elephant in the room, so to speak, by saying, hey, we're doing all we can from this perspective, but we're unwilling to do the very thing that needs to be done, which is to call a thing through policy. Um, but I also know that you all have, as you mentioned earlier, an anniversary coming up, and I'm wondering, how does international solidarity support the efforts of commemorating the 120 years of constitutional drive and push for Iran? Um, how can people support that day? I think it's on September 6th, correct?
September 6th marks the 60th anniversary of the formation of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. It's interesting to see that an organization that was started by 3 students has grown to such extent. And it is the largest opposition group in Iran. And as I said at the beginning, 120,000 people have been killed for just supporting this movement. So that is unprecedented in our history, and that's something that we take pride in. And so the people, as you said, tens of thousands are actually coming together in Europe, in Brussels, which is also the heart of the European Parliament, and also the European Union, to both commemorate the steadfastness, but also they have specific call to actions. They're asking for a stop to the executions in Iran. They're asking for the IRGC to be blacklisted. They are also asking for the recognition of the Iranian people's right to fight against this current regime. They're also coming with one message, a clear message, that there is a solution on Iran. There is an option forward. And that's, first of all, the third option, which means no war, no peace, and supporting the Iranian people for that change, that final change. And the second is that there is a viable alternative. We're not stuck between choosing between bad and worse. We're not stuck between choosing the mullah's theocracy or the one-party state of the Shah with the Savak and its crimes. No, there is a third option here too. And that's creating a democratic republic, a secular democratic republic, a non-nuclear Iran, which is based on the 10-point plans presented by Mrs. Rajavi. So we're coming together in the thousands to be able to reiterate that, to be able to show our support to those who are standing in the streets in Iran, those who risk their lives daily to carry out these activities, but keep the flame of resistance alive inside of Iran. And we are there, in the thousands to be able to tell the world that, the Iranian people have the capability and capacity to bring about change, but now is the time to stand by the Iranian people and allow them to create that change. And I think that's the message of the event on the 6th of September. So also, I know that this is probably going to be aired after the event, but if the program will be broadcast live on social media, so people can tune in and watch it even after the event to be able to see it. It will be broadcast live on X and the X account of Mariam Rajavi in 4 different languages: in English, French, Arabic, and Farsi. So for those who are interested to learn more, they could go there and see it.
I wanted to talk a little bit before we wrap up on the role of women in the resistance and their leadership in creating a democratic Iran, both in Iran and globally, because I do think it's really important for people to know that this struggle is being led by a lot of incredible women. And I wanted to ask how the women's leadership has shifted the narrative of resistance, both inside of Iran and globally.
So to go back on it, where it started from, I think the world saw in 2022 the role of women in Iran. But that wasn't something that came about overnight. It's something that's been brewing for years. Um, the resistance, the MEK, it used to have annually, they would look at the previous year and try to, they would come up with a report on, the previous year of resistance, how it's going and whatnot. And in 1984, when they were making that review, they realized something. They realized that despite the situation in Iran, which makes it extremely difficult for women to be active because they are systematically, targeted, and not just in the political realm, but even culturally inside of, at the time it wasn't very, um, I mean, yeah, people were used to having political prisoners, but, for your daughter to be a political prisoner, and then the thought of, the tortures that they're doing on her and things like that was like a taboo for the families, something that they really didn't want to address. But the reality was that these brave women, many of them teens or in their early 20s, they were really defying the whole resistance, and they were the face of defiance in face of this regime. They were the ones who were stronger, more steadfast, and even though they were facing way more severe tortures and things like that in prisons. And so that resistance was something that really caught the eye. But despite all the sacrifice that they were making, despite all the hurdles that they were overcoming, they weren't really um, represented in the leadership of the movement. And that is one thing that, they realized. And so immediately there was a change made. And they realized because we have this belief, um, because as I said, we are a group that moves forward with its principles. And so the key principle that we have is the people's equality. And then to see that we might have those prejudices in ourselves, that was maybe something that startled everyone in the movement. So they decided to overcome that, and they said, this is where you need to create equity. This is where you need to bring women are that force for change, because it's like a spring. The more that it's suppressed, the more energy and potential it has to jump when given them that possibility. And so with that, a shift began in this movement. And um, that Mrs. Rajavi actually is the one who's uh, really the the person behind this shift and to bring women on top. And she was the one. And what was important, it wasn't that she was, yes, she was chosen herself by the movement, but then it wasn't just, she wasn't like that one person only. She created a whole line of female leaders. And we've seen that every 2 years, the Secretary General of the PMI is elected. And since 1991, 1991, it's been women to this day. So um, for the most part of the history of this resistance, it's been led fully, entirely by women, capable women who have shown they've broken all, glass ceilings. They've overcome uh, really the test of uh, different obstacles and things that, really are unprecedented in history, I think. When you look at it in all dimensions, be it on the political front, be it in the military, even be it on in social front, everywhere, and they've shown their capability and their capacity. And so I remember at the time when this like this was became like something mainstream in the resistance. I was 12 at the time. And I remember that really formed my mentality, because I think I grew up um, with this belief that women can do everything. I didn't see any glass ceilings because in front of me, I had women who were capable of doing everything. And there isn't anything I could say that they weren't capable of doing and they had done. And it wasn't just words, it was actually actions that I had seen in front of me. And so um, that resonated not only within the community of the resistance or whatnot, it had its message and its effect inside of Iran. So Ms. Rajab she has this very famous quote. It's from 1996, I believe. She says in London, she said, uh, the vanguard women of today are the victors of tomorrow, and their voice will echo till eternity. And that became like an inspiration to women across Iran and like throughout the generations. And then that's why you see women use every possibility in Iran as act of defiance in front of this regime. Like for instance, people like saw the scenes from 2022, but if you go a bit back to in Iran, there are more female students in the university than there are male. It's not because there's positive discrimination for women to enter. In fact, it's the other way around. But they see it as a way of defiance. They say, you want to stick us in the home and to be, housewives and whatnot. We will defy your rule. We're going to show you otherwise. And so that's why you see that strong presence of women in Iran in every aspect. Right now, even in the resistance units, we see the presence of young women. We see that in the political prisoners right now. And we see, Even this Tuesdays against executions in Iran, you see that the female political prisoners are like really active in that, and they are that voice. They are the ones who are standing. And so I think it has had its ripple effect um, on everyone. Even it might not be like direct, you might not see the direct link sometimes, but 30 years, for 30 years, when you see that in front of you all the time, that's going to have an effect on you. That's going to, I mean, um, I think that, it has made its mark. I think the fact that, I mean, let's face the realities. There are many countries, including the US, that has never had a female president. Well, we passed that mark in 1993 when the NCRI elected Mrs. Rajabi as the president-elect for the interim government. And, you know, I think that is very inspiring for people inside of Iran to know that that future lies ahead. And it's not just one or two people. Like, for instance, they say when you look at in the political arena, there are a lot of female leaders that when you discuss they're when they speak about them, they they were women, but were in the they went in the steps of the men. They weren't they tried to copy that path. So that's why you see they didn't create other women leaders. It was just like that one individual who was able to accomplish that. But they were in a man's world. It wasn't changed. But what's important about this movement is that they changed that whole um, view and the lens that they look at women. And I think that's where you see that potential, that power, I think, that this resistance has. And I think that's one of the reasons that the regime fears it so much, because it's one thing to change policy. It's another thing to change people's mentality and their view on issues. And that's what this resistance has been able to do. And I think that is what gives us so much power to be able to overcome some of the greatest obstacles that any movement has faced. Um, but we've been able to do that.
You've been in the resistance for 26 years, and with all of the setbacks and challenges, what keeps you personally committed to this struggle?
I think um, there's a lot of things actually, but if I want to formulate that, I think that I have evolved as a person, um, step by step, with understanding how humanity works. I think that what's for me, one of the things that was really important was to be able to be a part of, because I think on daily basis, a lot of us, we have a lot of ideals, values, principles that we would like to stick to, but it's um, comparted in different parts, right? Like, for instance, well, when you're working with at work, you can't do this or you can't do that. I think for me, what's been important is that I can move forward and based on my principles and for those values and work towards that final goal, which is, you know, um, gaining the freedom and democracy for the people of Iran. But it goes a lot further than that, to be able to see a society where everyone is treated equally. And that's like the ideal for me. And I think that step by step, I think I have um, learned more and more about true human nature and how we can fight that, how we could fight uh, ego, those egotistical viewpoints that we have enshrined in us in society, and overcome those. That has really, it's very uh, emancipating, to be able to move forward with that. So I think that has been one of my ambitions. But the other thing is just seeing the pain and suffering of our people, and the fact that whatever we can do to make that suffering and pain less, even by a minute, we need to do that. If it means, what whatever is needed to stop even one execution. You know, I always grew up thinking that, with this mentality that, um, if we are able to, with our activities, um, make the day of the overthrow of this regime one day earlier, that's at least six lives saved, at least, because that's how many executions are carried out every day. That's aside from all those people who are suffering day to day, being executed, killed in the streets. I mean, suffering, all of that. To put an end to that pain, I think that gives me a lot of inspiration. And also, I think that our people really, they deserve so much more. And if I can be a small part of that, to be able to give that to our people, that is, I think, the greatest achievement of my life. So that's what helps me. And also, I think that being in um, in a place where on day to day basis you're dealing with people who are really, I mean, they're unprecedented in history. We don't find people like that. That in itself, I mean, learning from every single one of them, their stories, what they have overcome, what role that they have played, and understanding the value of every single one of them, that really gives you a lot of strength to move forward. And so I feel like, to be honest, if I want to put it in one word, I think I it might seem that I've made a great sacrifice in my life, but I think that I was the number one person who's gained from it um, on daily basis, and I am gaining from it um, daily. And so I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be alive in a time in history that I have this opportunity to be a part of this movement, because I think that there are a lot of people, like millions maybe around the world, they were not in a position to make that kind of decision, or to be able to play that kind of a role in the history of their country or mankind. So I'm grateful to have that opportunity, and to be able to dedicate my life to a cause that maybe could create a continuous impact on humanity.
If there was one concrete action for people to take to support the Iranian people's fight for democracy, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I think that across wherever you are, there we have a lot of networks. Um, First of all, raising awareness, become more aware of the issue, and try to see where you can help. So if you reach out, connect, and become active, that could be very helpful. You can also reach out to through the social media or websites of the resistance, and also the organizations who are active in this regard. So the NCRI is one that you could reach out to. If you're in the US, you could reach out to OIAC, OIAC. It's the Organization of Iranian American Communities there. In Europe, there's APA. It's the organizations of Iranian communities in Europe. And also, as I said, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, or Iran Freedom Network. So wherever you are, and if you're interested to really do something, reach out. But I think the most important thing is just raise awareness, and you know spread this information.
Zolal, thank you so very much for this conversation today. I've learned a lot and gained a greater appreciation for the struggle of the Iranian people. And I really appreciate the service that you are engaged in, fighting for democracy and fighting for the voiceless. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Tina. It was a pleasure to be with you.
I'm gonna
Oh,
stop the recording,
uh,
and then,